Hi, Timandra. Hope I pronounced your name right. Probably haven't, but I apologize if I haven't.
No, no,
We've met,
that's fine. That's you've got it dead right.
cool. We've met before, not just about ideas, but we met a few months ago. You were chairing a debate actually in my hometown, Birmingham, about AI and technology and the effects of that have as well. And me being a cheeky so-and-so decided to ask four questions at once.
I remember they were all good questions though. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was particularly about AI and criminal justice, wasn't it, and policing and all that. That.
Yeah, and I've had one since about AI and democracy and the press. I had one, I
Oh.
think, the month after, which I attended as well. So yeah, that was really good. And we'll get on a little bit about AI in this interview. But first, like I do with every guest, can you just say, obviously I said who you are, your name, basically your journey up until this point.
Oh, that's a very that could be a long answer. So I'm Timandra Harkness. I would currently call myself a writer, journalist, and author. I know they kind of overlap. I've got quite a new book out called Technology is Not the Problem,
Hmm.
which the title is a kind of clue to what's in it. I had a previous book called Big Data Does Size Matter, which is about 7 years old now, in fact. And apart from that, I do journalism both in print and sometimes on the radio, mainly about where technology and society kind of coincide. I also do quite a lot of live events. I mean, as you said, I came to Birmingham and chaired an event, do a lot of chairing and speaking. And in the past, I have been a stand-up comedian. So I call myself a lapsed comedian because I'm not doing it at the moment, but I can't promise that I won't relapse and do it again at some point.
So why write this book? Technology is not the problem, because if I remember correctly, wasn't it supposed to be originally a subtitle, not the main title of the book?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Well remembered. Yeah, it's been through a couple of titles actually. The original title, when I first started talking about writing it, was The Personalized Century. And that's because I was noticing that we live in a world where we just expect everything to be personalized for us. So, I mean, obviously, my social media feed will be different from your social media feed, but that kind of means we each have our own individual media channel, really. But everything, services, adverts, when I look up travel details on a travel app, I don't get an entire timetable. I get this is where you are, this is where you're going to, here's your options. And I thought that was a big change, obviously facilitated by technology, but a big change from, if you like, our grandparents or great grandparents' world, which was the mass century. It's the mass production, mass media, mass politics. So I was interested in that. And then I started thinking about why is it that we have this personalizing technology? And I decided that it's because we want to be reassured all the time about who we are. So then at that point, the title was recognized because we all
Mm.
want to be recognized as the unique person we are. And that's why, even though we say it's creepy, we do kind of like this technology that personalizes everything. And then I think we just felt it was a bit enigmatic. So me and the editor and my book agent had a little conversation, and it was my book agent, in fact, who said, well, look, this is the subtitle, but why don't we just make this the title, because then it's clear what the book is about. So
Mhm.
that's how we ended up with Technology is Not the Problem. But I also like it because there's a lot of books coming out at the moment that basically blame everything on technology. And I
Yeah.
do want to say, well, it's very easy to blame all the problems of society on technology, and particularly on big tech companies because they are very big and rich and powerful. But that kind of lets us off the hook because technology really just reflects what we want of it and reflects our own insecurities and reflects what's going on in the world. It doesn't, it hasn't got any agency. It doesn't shape what's happening. So that's how we ended up with the third title.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've read most of it. I mean, not all of it, but I have to say it's a very good read. It's some of it which I can relate to a little bit, but also I did a psychology degree, so there's a lot in there which I could relate to, especially when it comes to Skinner as well, and that was and John Watson, which we'll get onto later. But you've kind of alluded to your last answer, which is technology. Well, you said technology is not the problem. What is basically the problem us?
Well, yeah, essentially, And I mean, technology gives us the how. So the way we do things today is partly shaped by how technology lets us do things. But we only have the technology we have because of the particular forms that our insecurities take, I think, in today's society. And I'm always a bit wary here that it sounds like therapy. Somebody actually said to me, "Oh, is your book intended to be therapy?" I'm like, well, no, it isn't. But in a way, I think a lot of the problems that we have today are about how we as individuals think about ourselves and how we're a bit obsessed with ourselves, really.
Yeah.
And we're obsessed with how other people see us. And so when a tech company comes along and says, "Oh, I can, this app will basically feed you things that are unique for you and how special you are at all times and respond to what you post at all times," then that's why it's so seductive, because we are constantly looking for reassurance about who we are. But you study psychology, so it'd be interesting to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a point in that as well, and certainly with social media, which again we'll talk about in more detail. But you discuss in a book about Skinner and operant conditioning, and actually social media is a very good example of that. Not just in terms of the post as well and the feedback we get from those, in terms of the comments, in terms of the likes, in terms of the repost as well. And it's probably the one use of good use, good in inverted commas, use of Skinner's operant conditioning that I've actually seen. This idea that just a reinforcement, and it's actually been to our detriment, absolutely. But whether we can get rid of it now is another matter. Um, because I don't, yeah, whether we can get rid of it now because it's so ubiquitous in our lives. Like this will go up on social media. People use social media for marketing. We use it other things. So no, even if you're someone who wants to take a break from it, I think it's hard to do so because again, it's just everywhere in our lives, and we use it for various reasons. So like, we can't get rid of it. So I think the best way to deal with it is to at least minimize its use.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And the problem we have is that we use it for the good things and the bad things. So we do use it to connect with each other and to learn about the world and actually to get out of our bubbles and our echo chambers in a way, because if you want to just relate to people who think like you can. But it turns out most of us don't. And so if you want to go outside of your comfort zone and find people who disagree with you or new ideas or new information, that's also really easy. So you can do these good things, but you're right, the way that the apps and the platforms are designed, they're designed to keep us coming back so that we can be shown adverts essentially. And the way they've done that is to give us like a little reward, but not enough to make you go, right, that's it. I now feel completely satisfied and reassured about who I am. I'm going to put this down for the rest of the day. It's like, that's fine, but I'm going to come back in half an hour and just check. So it is, no, it is tricky. I mean, I find it really hard to not default to picking up my phone when I don't
Mm,
know what to do or I'm bored, or even if I hit something that's difficult in my work, I go, oh, I'll just have a little break. Oh, I'll just look at social media. So,
yeah,
it's something that we have to try and manage. How can we use it for what we do want to use it for and not let it use us
yeah.
for what the people who designed it want us to do?
I just wonder, is one of the reasons we use social media a lot because it's easy in many respects because you're behind a screen, and also because it's actually cheap. It's cheaper, for example, for me to meet a friend, speak to a friend of mine, a friend in inverted commas on social media, than it is to actually meet that person in real life, where I have to go on the bus and then go to a place and then we meet and then we chat and so on and so forth. Would you say that's the reason why in a way a lot of people use social media because you can hide behind this black mirror, so to speak?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, but you've kind of rolled two things in there, that it is cheap and convenient and quick. So when we all had to do all our meetings online, I did hate it, but at the same time, it meant that, for example, if you know someone who lives in California now, they can join the meeting in their pajamas, whereas previously they could only have done that if they'd flown to wherever you were. Or, or people who've got little kids to look after or something and can't get a babysitter, but they can join online. So there are those elements that are convenient and cheap and enable us to do stuff. But I think you've definitely put your finger on something with the hiding behind the screen and the safety, because it's all a bit more controllable. I mean, the teenage thing particularly, I think, I read this survey, which was before COVID, so it's before social lockdowns and isolation, that they asked American teenagers how they preferred to interact with their friends. And number one was text messaging. That was above face-to-face interaction. And my first reaction was, I was really shocked. I was like, this is terrible. Teenagers are just texting each other and not meeting. This is awful. Which is not strictly true. Actually, turns out they are still meeting. But then I immediately went, yeah, but actually, I remember being a teenager and it was social agony because you were so concerned about what people thought of you and what your friends and what impression you were going to make with everything you said and everything you wore. And, absolutely everything was like very sensitive social interactions with your friends or people you fancied. And if you're doing that through a screen, you can control it. It's like someone messages you and you can think, okay, how am I going to answer this? And you can pick your words, you can delete them and start again. So you've got a little bit more control over what you put out there, and they can't see your face when you react to their message and so on. So I can see the appeal of it. But of course, if you never do that, you don't learn those hard lessons we all
Yeah.
learned as teenagers, which is like, okay, well, don't say that. And especially don't say that to this person at this moment. And even though you're feeling this, don't let your face say it. And just learning to be a human amongst humans is something we have to do.
Yeah, well, again, this is another point which I was going to get to later, but you've touched on it there, and we'll continue with this. So, I, like I said, I've done a psychology degree years ago, and I remember hearing about one study where they talked about London black cab drivers, who this is long before sat navs, and they used to have to read the knowledge, and they obviously read it and you know which routes, and then they would test their brains, and they found that the part of the brain with spatial awareness was a lot bigger than anywhere else. You've talked about social cues as well when meeting people, because that's a skill that seems to be getting less and less because you're doing it again behind a screen and also text messaging. And I just wonder how technology is affecting us in terms of health, not just mental health in terms of images being portrayed, but in terms of our own cognitive skills as well, whether they're diminishing those and whether as a result, you could actually see a rise in cognitive disorder illnesses such as Alzheimer's and dementia. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, that's a really interesting point, actually, in relation to, I hadn't thought about it in relation to social skills, or at least not, not explicitly. But the navigation thing, absolutely. And I was thinking about this, and not so much cab drivers, but just all of us using navigation apps and map apps, the where you go, oh, I'm going here, and the little blue dot tells you where to go. And so I actually made a radio program called What Has Sat Nav Done to Our Brains?
Yeah,
And went and talked to the people at UCL who did those studies with the black cab drivers, and they're still doing research into navigation, and some other people. And the people at University College London said, well, it depends how you use these apps. If you just use the app to look at a map and decide your route and try and remember your route and then look around you as you're traveling, that's no different from using a paper map. But if you just follow a blue dot and never look at where you're going, then you won't learn the route. And because navigational memory, spatial memory, is so central to how we make memories generally, and they said, one of the signs of Alzheimer's is that people get lost and they can't remember where they are and they can't remember routes. They said, yeah, this is not a crazy idea that actually we might be affecting our ability to remember things in general if we don't any longer have to remember where we are and where things are and how to get to places. In fact, the producer on that program was so horrified by what they told us that he basically he stopped using even maps and just went, no, we're just going to go out, and if we get lost, we get lost, and we'll find our way eventually. And I'm like, well, that's a bit much. We could look at a map first and then go. He's like, no, because we're going to lose our memories and we have to go and get lost and find our own way. So no, I really think that's true. I think that's a reasonable worry. And as I say, when we talked to the brain scientists, they said, yeah, no, this is a very reasonable worry because actually laying down memories in general is very related to laying down memories about where you are and how to get to places.
What are your thoughts in regards to how technology, and not just social media, probably other brands of technology is used in regards to people establishing their identities and also their self-expression?
Well, I think it's very central to that. Um, Social media in particular, because the way we use social media is to project ourselves and say, look, this is, either through the photos you post or the words you use or whatever, you're projecting a version of yourself out. Yeah, even if it's just to your friends and family and people you know in real life, if you like, by doing it through social media, it has this very edited quality. But especially when you do it out to a wider group of people, people you don't know in public or whatever, I think it's very important for that. Um, and but also very more broadly, I think, in a sense, because of this way that technology tailors things to us as individuals, there's that sense that each of us ought to have our own unique worlds that's built around us, kind of reinforces that idea that the most important thing is that everybody is different and special. But again, I mean, to go back to the title of the book, I think sometimes people say this is because of the technology. It's like the technology came first, and then we became obsessed with building our identities and having them reflected back to us. But I think it was the other way around. In fact, I think the obsession with our own identities was already growing. I mean, certainly back in the 1960s or 70s, for example. But then when technology came along, like it's so easy and so inviting to keep doing that. Whereas I guess back in the 70s or 80s, if you wanted to show everybody who you were, then you'd have to actually get real clothes and a real, hairdo or whatever, and go out on the street and go, yes, look, this is who I am. I'm expressing who I am. But now you can just sit, in your room using one thumb and project yourself out there into the
Yeah,
ether and go, look, this is who I am. Like me, comments.
yeah. So to give an example, I think of what you're saying is, say, airbrushing in magazines. It's not the fact that we can do it that was the issue. It's the fact that we wanted to do it and we just created the technology to do it. Would that be accurate assessment?
Yeah, no, I think that's very well put. Exactly. It's I mean, there's always an element of if you create a technology, people will mess about, see what they can do with it. But it'll only stick when there's a demand for it. So you think about text messaging when they brought that in almost as a, oh well, we can stick this in as a free extra, but we don't think anyone will use it. But it really took off, and teenagers especially started to use it, and it became a really major way to communicate. But there were similar technologies much earlier than that where you could just send word messages, but nobody really was interested, so they didn't bother. So I think, we have to want the thing as well as it being available.
Yeah, yeah. It's you talked about teenagers earlier, and obviously with teenagers, most people do, but especially with identity and self-expression. What I've found interesting, especially over the last, say, 10, 15 years, is certainly when I was growing up, there used to be, as a teenager in the 90s, there was a lot of subgenres. Maybe when you're a teenager, so it wasn't just, you had, goths, I was into dance music, you had the hip hop heads and so on and so forth. I don't know if it's technology, maybe, especially social media, but it seems to have made us more bland and more homogenous. Would that be right? It seems like everyone's under this one roof. Doesn't seem any to be subcultures um, amongst teenagers now. Like they might like different things, but in terms of different particular groups you belong to, I don't think that's the case. And I'm wondering if social media is something that's made people more homogenous in that respect.
I mean, that's an interesting point because I'm kind of inclined to agree with you, although I don't really know many teenagers, so
Mm.
I'm not really in a position to say. But on the other hand, I was talking to a friend who's a music journalist, and he said, well, the difference from, because he's about our age, I think, he said the difference is when we were teenagers, you would like listen to you might watch Top of the Pops, or you'd listen to the charts at the weekend. And so even if you didn't like all the music, and Lord knows we didn't, but you would know what was out there. So you'd have an idea of what was popular in different genres. And he said, now you don't get that because things come through streaming services or YouTube or whatever. You can get somebody who is a massive, massive star in one genre of music, but people outside that genre will never even have heard of them. So he said, I could name, because he's a music journalist, so he knows more. He could name to me half a dozen people who, within their genre, are massive stars and have millions of fans and sell millions of tracks, whatever. But I will never have heard of them because they're only visible, really, to their own fans.
Hmm.
So he was suggesting that actually it's more fragmented, and it's fragmented in a way that we're just not even aware of necessarily all the genres or all the people. But at the same time, I slightly agree with you that there aren't visible subcultures.
Hmm.
I don't go out in the street and go, look, yeah, there's the goths, there's the punks, whatever. So maybe they only exist within the digital world, and in the real world, if you like, they're not visibly different from each other. I don't know is the answer. I think you should do some research and find out. I'd like to know.
Well, yeah, I've not got any kids, but even like you say, I'm out and about, and you got school kids, like at the bus stop and whatnot, or you see a group of kids. There's no distinct personality amongst, well, personality because I don't really know, but no distinct features about them. Whereas when I was growing up, even as like from secondary school, sixth form, college, there definitely was. Even if you didn't like the music, you knew who they were, and there was all subcultures. But it just seems very homogenous and very, I would even say, bland almost. Yeah, there's like not really, and I'm wondering actually, because it's going to lead on the next point about the media, if that's an issue with the media as well, because again, you see, and not just talking about the typical X or Facebook, but even stuff like YouTube, where it's very quick, and people, even what I call critical thinkers, seem to come up with instant opinions, and it just spreads like wildfire. So, in terms of technology, how has that affected what our news media, not in terms of both reporting it and also how we receive and dissect it?
Well, yes. Now that's a very big point. I mean, the first thing I would say is that it's it's more fragmented in the sense that each of us has our own individual channel, really, because we tend to get our news through the internet and social media. So that means that what I get in my feed is partly my choice, partly what the algorithms decide I might be interested in, and partly what the people that I follow choose to share. So it's kind of, instead of the old days, like, I don't know, 50 years ago, I might have read a particular newspaper, and then
Mhm.
what I get is the editor of that newspaper has decided this is news, this will go on this page, this will go on this page, and everyone who reads the newspaper gets the same. Or I might have a favorite TV or radio channel, and again, I'll get the same as everybody else who watches or listens to that. And there's just a few editors deciding. But now we all have, like, I don't know, thousands and thousands of editors. So we all get a slightly different picture. Um, but it is also, the other differences are things like, it's not just top down. It's not just like, well, you buy the newspaper and you read the newspaper, and
Mhm.
the most you can do really is tell someone else you should read this this
Yeah,
newspaper.
yeah, yeah.
uh we're all also creators of content, or at least editors. Like, what we choose to share, what we choose to pass on,
Mhm.
then affects what other people see. So things can go viral because they hit a nerve with a lot of people and they spread really quickly. And it's not that any one person has said, look, this is really newsworthy. It's that it's caught something. And sometimes it can be quite random, and sometimes it can be like, well, this preoccupation was here and this one thing has hit it. And that's both good and bad. I mean, it's bad in the sense that what was in favor of having news editors is that those people have a sense of what is the news for. They hopefully have professional standards of, have we actually checked that this is true? If not, we're not going to put it in. and things like that. Whereas when we're all doing this, most of us do not have those professional standards and haven't had that training and don't think about things in that way. But the plus side, obviously, is that you can't get away with stuff. If somebody does post something that's not true or is doubtful or in dispute, there's always somebody there ready to jump on them and go, no, actually, that's not true. So there is a bit more holding each other to account. There's also, I mean, people talk a lot about filter bubbles and echo chambers, and oh no, because we all get a slightly separate version of news and entertainment. The idea that we all live inside a bubble and we think everyone agrees with us. But that's not really true, in fact. When people have done research, they find that people who get their news through the internet and social media generally are exposed to a wider range of sources and opinions than, say, my dad's generation, who would just pick one newspaper and read that newspaper and go, well, everything in this newspaper is true, but everything in the other newspaper is biased.
Mm-hmm.
And also, a lot of the news that we get now it actually comes through established newspapers and broadcasters. It's just that the selection is maybe through the internet or social media or through friends and so on. So it's not necessarily less reliable, although obviously some of it is, but the selection of it is more eclectic.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make more sense. And in terms of the amount of stories, yeah, I would agree with you. But in terms of the type of news we get, do you think it's actually been to that detriment? And I'll give you an example, like local news. Again, in the 90s as a teenager, local news was big, like the local newspapers like the Yorkshire Post, the Manchester Evening News. Now, yes, you might get the odd websites that have do local news, like in Birmingham, you have the Dispatch and probably in other cities as well. But you don't see it as often as you usually do. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that is a really bad thing. That I know when there's local issues near me, I think, "Well, if only we had an independent local newspaper, because obviously we get the council newspaper,
Hmm.
but obviously the council only put things that make the council look good.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And we do, to be fair, we have a couple of local independent websites, but they're basically funded by donations because I think that's a large part of it. It just became very uneconomical to run a local paper, and especially once the councils started making their own newspapers, because then they're in competition,
Hmm.
uh, and a lot of the independent papers went out of business, and that's a real problem, I think, with holding local politicians to account and keeping local issues alive. I don't think that's entirely caused by technology, though, of course, as soon as we got used to the idea that news is free online, then it becomes very hard to charge for it
Yeah,
because people just go, oh, well, I just won't follow them,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I think it's almost like again the cable wars back in the day where yes, okay, there's a lot of it available, but you still have to pay for each individual
Yeah.
one. So yeah, so that can make things more difficult. Just wondering, again, it's something else I thought about. So we've talked about airbrushing and how obviously people have used, I mean, since the 90s, really been using that technology to make themselves look a lot, the skin a lot smoother, the eyes a lot better, etc. And when I first joined X, when it was known as Twitter then, I used to take the mickey because I would sometimes write posts that every word in the post would have a hashtag because I literally saw people putting those in because they wanted all that attention. The one is me, me, me. And especially on Facebook, again, when I joined, and this is like early 2000s, there was this need to try and get as many friends as possible. And I'm just wondering, those examples I've mentioned, and maybe you can give more, has social media made us more narcissistic
Um,
or technology in general?
well, you see, I'm reluctant to say it's made us more narcissistic. It's certainly facilitated it. It
Mm,
makes it easier. But I think we were already very narcissistic, and it just gave us a way to do it with less friction. And of course, the people providing the social media, they want us to keep going back to check if someone's liked our post or whatever, because then they can show us more adverts. Basically, that's the economic model. So, I mean, clearly it has some effect because it is much easier to keep doing stuff about yourself when, again, you can just do it in your room on your phone with one thumb than if you had to. I don't know what the equivalent would have been. Yeah, if you have to actually like leave the house and or make a massive effort and start a fanzine so that people will look at you or whatever. So it's democratized narcissism, maybe.
Yeah.
Put it within the reach of everybody.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I think it has, and I just think. I mean, I see people put pictures up of like their holidays and whatnot, and I'm thinking, like, and be honest, I've done the same thing, and I think sometimes it can give you a lift, but then other times I do think, why are you posting that for? Even things like I helped someone today, and I think, are you doing that because you really want to showcase something that was good, or are you doing it so that people could like you and follow you more? So there's
Yeah.
always that dissonance in my mind about why people are doing certain things.
Yeah,
Um,
I think there is that, and it's also then, yeah, you start to think, am I doing this because I want to do it, or am I doing it so I can tell people about it later?
mm,
And again, that kind of, I'm doing this so that other people will know about it later is not a brand new thing. I mean, people will always have done things, and then even if you just want to tell your friends, say, oh, I did this great thing. Uh, but the ease of then sharing it and making it public does make it much more tempting, I think, to, when you're thinking about whether to do something, think how it will appear to others later, rather than just thinking, is this something I want to do? Is this something I ought to do? You're already telling the story of it, or writing the post, or imagining how the picture of it will look while
yeah,
you're doing it. And that kind of hall of mirrors means that you become the object of others' gaze instead of the subject of your own life.
yeah. Although, is there an argument to say that actually, because not so much on Facebook, but on other platforms, you can create alternative identities, and actually that can bring more information to the fore that otherwise wouldn't have been available. So, to give you an example, someone like the Secret Barrister, what that person produces, and I know, for example, there's people who suffer from domestic violence and have talked about their experiences, but have done it under a pseudonym on certain line. I imagine with that technology to do that, it'd be a lot harder to bring those issues to the fore. It'd be a lot harder for me to do this on a local radio station because I'd have to audition amongst people and have a particular time slot. So there's an argument to say you can, yes, it's become more personalised, but you can get more people out there with bits of information that you wouldn't have got out before.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that's a really interesting example, because that, if you do something anonymously for whatever reason, then you're kind of not doing it in a way to boost your online persona and say, look, aren't I great?
Hmm.
Because people won't necessarily connect that anonymous persona with you. But there's also these very important reasons, like, if you are, or if you're an oppressive regime country, or if you are a victim of abuse or domestic violence, then it's very important that you can do stuff anonymously, or if you're a whistleblower. And that, I mean, that's one reason why, when people say, oh, the internet's so abusive, we should ban anonymous accounts, I say, no, 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 just stop and think just for a second here.
Yeah,
All the reasons why people might be anonymous, actually trolling is the least of them. And in fact, a lot of trolls are not even anonymous. They just don't even bother to anonymize themselves. They just don't care, because they're doing it through
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
screen, so it doesn't feel real. So
Yeah, definitely. I do, like I said, I do think there's advantages with that, and a lot of the subjects that we've talked about already are covered in AI. Now, as I said at the beginning, obviously we met earlier this year because I was at a debate that you chaired about AI and whatnot. And one of the interesting parts about it was actually AI and crime and how that affects it. Just quickly, because I know there's different questions asked in that debate. What were your thoughts on it in shorthand, like in terms of AI and crime, and is it useful, is it not, or is it just making up for the fact that we've had police cuts over the last 10 years?
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. It's that I think it's often happens with AI. They're like, "Oh, AI will solve this." Like, well, the this that you're trying to solve, actually, you could solve by not having taken away all the humans who would do this better. But yeah, I think it's also, I mean, going back to what you were saying about, Skinner and Watson, the behaviorist idea of humans that we conform to patterns and are predictable through our data. That I think I'm very, very wary of using that in crime. And I think there was a little spate about 10 years ago of police forces getting very excited about using AI to predict who was going to commit crime and where crime was going to happen. And there's like, no, this is great. We can prevent crime from happening before it happens, which obviously means abandoning the assumption of innocence
Mhm.
because you're basically pre-criming, you're arresting people before they've committed a crime. Um, and I think people are backing off from that a bit now, mainly because it doesn't really work very well,
Yeah.
and then also slightly just because of the natural justice sense. So, for example, the algorithmic tools to try and predict who's going to reoffend. So
Mm.
somebody gets arrested, should we be sending them to court and possibly to prison, or are they somebody who, if we get them a bit of support and try and get them back on the right track, actually they'll never commit another crime. And so it's better for everyone if we don't send them to court.
Mm.
And can we predict who is going to be which person?
Yeah.
And the problem is that statistically, you can do a certain amount of prediction. As in, statistically, you can put people in groups and say, well, this group is probably 60% likely to reoffend, and this group is only 20% likely to reoffend. So, these people we'll send to court and the other people we won't. But that's talking about a group of people. You can't actually make that kind of prediction about an individual.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, I'm 60% likely to reoffend and you're only 20% likely to reoffend, because that's not how statistics works.
Yeah.
And also, they found that the best, because there's algorithms that people drew up and they were done by private companies and they remain secret. And so this was a big hoo-ha in the States, where people were rightly saying, listen, you've used this algorithm to give me a risk score of reoffending, and because of that the judges refused me parole, but I can't even appeal this because you won't tell me how your algorithm works.
Mhm.
So here in the UK, a couple of police forces said, well, it would be useful to us to know who's at higher or lower risk so we can decide who to send to court. Let's, alongside like using human judgment as we do now, let us track people and see if we can find any factors that predict who's going to reoffend or not. And the biggest factor, even above sex, which I'm afraid, sorry to say this, Chris, is a huge factor,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what it is about you men, but you're much more likely to be criminals. Um, but even above that, postcode was the biggest single predictor.
Yeah.
So you could basically say, well, what's your postcode? No, I'm afraid you're 80% likely to reoffend, so you're going to go to prison. And nobody would think that was fair.
Mm.
I mean, least of all me, because I live in a postcode where I would definitely go to prison. But it's like nobody would say, well, you can't, you know, it's so obvious. You can't say to somebody, you have to go to jail because of your postcode, right? But statistically, that was the strongest predictive factor.
Mhm.
And this, I think, brings us back to the thing. AI can crunch numbers and analyze data and say, well, comparing current data and past data with who has reoffended in the past, this is the population of people that are more at risk.
Mhm.
But you cannot apply that to individuals with any sense of fairness at all, or even massive amounts of accuracy. But it's like, even if you were 90% sure that this person was going to reoffend, is it justice?
Yeah, yeah.
You just extrapolate from people that were like you in the past. I mean, it's fair enough for Amazon to say people who bought books like the ones you've bought also bought these books,
Yeah.
because I can buy them or not buy them. But if you're saying, oh well, people who did things like you do in the past went on to commit another crime, so you're going to prison. Like, whoa,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
that's not
yeah, yeah.
that's not the same. So that is my massive skepticism. But I have to say, I was actually quite reassured at that meeting, because all the people who were talking about that meeting were very aware of these pitfalls and were saying, look, we can use it to help process intelligence and help solve crimes, but but you can't apply it to individuals and say this person is going to reoffend and this person isn't. So I was kind of comforted by that, really.
Yeah, two questions in what you just said. One, is it what you just described, basically a digital version of stop and search? And two, he talks about reoffending, but does he talk about, well, the severity of a offence, so shopkeeping as opposed to assault, does it take those two things into account? And also, does he talk about actual solutions? So if you're young and in a gang, does he actually talk about, well, if we get them out of the gang and put them in like a youth centre and whatnot? It doesn't do any of that, I take it.
Well, no, not really. I mean, only to the extent that it might say these young people are at high risk, so let's open up a youth centre in this area. But this has been criticised in the past, that social work departments were using these kinds of algorithms to say, oh, these families, the kids in these families are at high risk of ending up not in employment, education, training, and therefore turning to crime. And there was, I mean, this is some years ago now. As I say, I think people are pulling back a bit, but there was this chilling phrase, which was non-negotiable support, which basically means the social workers are going to come into your home whether you want them or not, because otherwise we think your kids are going to turn to crime. Um, and it's like, look, you could look at an area, you could look at a postcode and say,
Mhm.
in this area, we think the kids are at higher risk. Therefore, we should open a youth centre in this postcode. Fair enough. Good. I think that's a good use of AI. But to try and identify individuals or families, I think is it. Yeah, you're basically saying we can see your future destiny and we don't like it, and that just takes away any sense that individuals can buck the odds. Individuals can say, okay, well, I'm growing up in a bad postcode and my parents are unemployed and there's loads of gangs in my school, but nevertheless, I have decided I'm not going to do that. And if you don't think that individuals are capable of making those choices, then, we might as well let AI make all the decisions, really, because you've kind of given up on humanity.
Yeah. So, in regards to individuals and groups, how is not just AI but technology in general, how has it been used over the years to predict how people will vote? Because obviously you've got social media now, which actually predicted in a way that Trump and Brexit, but no one really followed it. And also going back to what I said about digital stop and search, in the sense that you're doing it on a computer instead of on the ground, but again, is it a lazy way of predicting and using it to how can I put this? Basically, it's a lazy way of campaigning an MP for campaign to use technology instead of actually getting boots on the ground and knocking on people's doors and doing that. So the first point is, how is technology used for polling, and how's it been used, and how's it changed over the last decade or so?
Um, well, I mean, in terms of polling, like predicting who's going to vote which way, a lot of it is just a much more sophisticated way of doing what they were doing anyway, which is like doing focus groups and surveys and saying, oh, what are people concerned about? Okay, well, from this we might predict that in this constituency there's probably so many thousand people that are still wavering on this particular issue, and so if we go in and campaign hard on this issue, maybe we can win them over. So I think one of the main differences, well, I suppose there's two main differences in when they do all the campaigning. So like at the moment, there's the election campaign going on, and most of the messaging, most of the advertising by the political parties is online, digital advertising or messaging. So on TikTok, apparently you can't pay for political ads. So
Mm.
all the parties are making videos, but they have to just put them out there and hope that other people pass them on and promote them. And in one way, that's just like, well, we're just going where people are. And as you say, it is cheaper. It is cheaper. It's much cheaper to run digital ads than to print loads of leaflets and find volunteers to go around and shove them through everyone's doors and knock on the doors. It's obviously cheaper and takes less time. But there's two particular advantages to doing digital stuff instead. One is that you can tailor it much more closely to individuals. Although interestingly, at the moment, it doesn't seem that any of the parties are particularly doing that. They are still targeting geographically to a great extent. So they're just showing people an advert saying, this is your local candidate, vote for us, rather than finding you specifically some issue that you care about. There's a bit of targeting on age, there's a bit of targeting on, we already have your email and we know you like us. But it's still pretty broad brush. But in principle, they can find all the people who on social media have expressed concern about dogs, and then put out a special ad which says, you know, if you vote for us and we'll take care of your dog, whatever.
Mm.
But in practice, they don't do it that much because it's
Yeah.
actually quite expensive. But you can show people very different messages. And again, this is not completely new, because you think back to when political campaigns used to be like a full-page ad in a newspaper. They wouldn't have put the same ad in the Daily Mirror and the Daily Telegraph. They would have gone, what do Daily Mirror readers care about? Let's talk to them about that. What do Telegraph readers care about? We'll talk to them about that. And you would only know they were different if you bought both papers. But now it can be much more differentiated, because we don't tend to look over each other's shoulders and see each other's social media feeds. So they could show you quite a different message to what they showed me, and neither of us would necessarily know that. And that, I think, it's a problem, because it stops politics being part of a big public conversation about where we want the country to go in the future. So, you know, we would see the same message and have an argument about what we thought of it. It's much more it's much more like just using the internet to sell you shoes. Like, here are our shoes, the best, buy our shoes. It's not like we're actually choosing a government to exercise political power on our behalf. You know, it's a bit more important than that. So that's one big difference. The other big difference is that they can adapt the campaigns very, very quickly to what is working. So, and you will see this, that all the political parties will send out variants of the same ad or the same message. And then the ones that get the best response, they will keep showing those ones and they'll drop the others. And they can, you know, this can be automated, basically. You just go, well, the one that gets the most clicks through, we'll keep running that one and we'll drop the others. So but again, it's just like advertising. It's just they're refining which is the most effective, which gets the biggest response. But in one way, so, you know, that is a difference, I think. It's not a complete entire difference, but it is a difference in how it works. But in one way, I do think it's that you think you're a political campaigner, where are you going to go to engage with potential voters? You know, there's all the membership of all the political parties has gone way, way down. So they're probably not going to come to a meeting. They probably won't even come to a hustings. We don't tend to belong to groups like, you know, trade unions or churches or whatever, where somebody might go along and talk to us as a group, unless you can spare the time to go and knock on everybody's door. And because political party membership has gone down, they have fewer and fewer people to do that. You go where people are. Where are we? We're online. So in one way, I mean, you know, people have talked about it as if it's this amazing, sinister psychological manipulation thing, and they get into your social media feed, and the next thing you know, you've voted for them without even really knowing why. But I think really it's more realistic to talk about it as just, look, it's the same as when they used to knock on your door and give you a leaflet. It's just that instead of giving you a paper leaflet, they're popping up on your screen.
But does that disadvantage certain groups not being able to see those? Example I'm thinking of is the elderly, because they might not have the technological know-how to actually access it, or they need to get a relative or friend to actually access it for them. So we say that's a group that's being missed out.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think it's definitely there are some groups are more and less online, and there tends to be the disadvantaged and the elderly who are less online. I mean, some people at the moment would argue that they have the advantage because they don't have to look at all this endless political messaging,
Mhm,
but that's obviously rather cynical. Um, but obviously, it also means that political parties, and they will try and target. Age is actually something else they will target on. So there's a particular Labour advert. There's this great thing called Who Targets Me, which
mhm,
is a group that monitors what political ads go out and will post examples of them, and you can, between that and Facebook now has these transparency tools where you can go and see what ads been posted and broadly what audiences they've been targeted at. So if you want to target ads about pensions, you can say we want this mainly shown to people over 50, say.
mhm.
Um, there was one particular Labour ad about cancer treatment that was targeted basically people between 45 and 65, which is the kind of the main age at which suddenly your friends are getting unwelcome diagnoses. So that was really clearly targeted by age. But then, of course, you get things like TikTok. And it was like, oh, it's the TikTok election. Suddenly all the parties on TikTok. Like, yeah, but most TikTok users are really quite young. They're less likely to vote. Half of them probably too young to vote.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you might get a really good response on TikTok and think, oh, that's it, we're going to win this election. But actually, you won't because the people who are far more likely to turn out and vote aren't even on TikTok.
Yeah, indeed. I and people who watch the podcast already know this, but I basically come from a sports background. And one
Oh.
of the things you found over the last decade, you've seen, especially a lot of teams, they've used a lot of data when it comes to football teams signing players and understanding where they fit in a certain system and whatnot. And they use various apps and programs that can do that. I mean, that's been that way for about 25 years, but especially over the last 10 years, been really ramped up. But that's easy in many respects because it's more quantitative data. Whereas something you did in a book where you talk about in terms of fashion, it's like, how on earth? I mean, people know to a certain degree what in fashion because there's a lot of marketing in fashion that has been for decades. But how did they use technology and data within the fashion world? How did you use it now?
Well, I mean, there's a few things, but I think one of the big changes there is that again, fashion used to be, in a way, used to be top down. That's like the fashion designer would design something, and then the manufacturer would make it, and then they would put it in the shops, and we would buy it or not buy it. But in reality, of course, fashion is all about, you know, presenting yourself to people you know, and especially making yourself part of a group or not part of a group, standing out from a group. And so it is very social. And so we've always used fashion to express ourselves in our own way. And I think one thing that happens now is that fashion designers and manufacturers can make this much more a two-way process. So they can get instant feedback on not just what people are buying, but also how people are wearing it, what people like, how people are styling it, what other trends are out there, and use this to adapt what they're making.
Mhm,
And combine that with the kind of the technology of manufacturing, where you can actually design and make things much more quickly.
mhm,
And so I think it's a much more two-way process where fashion designers respond very quickly to trends that are out there and then make things and get them out. And even in some cases, offer virtual versions where people can try something on virtually, like as in dress their online persona in something that doesn't exist yet, and then either make it in real life or even, I mean, in a few cases, you can buy clothes that don't exist so that your online avatar can wear them, which is surely the ultimate in
yeah.
I only have this to be seen in it. I mean, I think that's still pretty niche because most of us still want to keep warm or, be able to leave the house. But it's definitely, the digital has become an integral part of the world of fashion, I think. And it does mean there's this two-way thing between the people who make the clothes and the people who buy and wear the clothes. That I mean, in a way, it always was, but in a much more rough and ready way. I think again, like the political campaigning, it's much more instantaneous.
Did that used to happen more with celebrities? So, for example, not just in terms of what they wore was unique, but even the jewelry. Like you hear of celebrities getting married, and like the wedding ring would be very unique. Whereas now it seems like technology can actually you can recreate that particular piece of jewelry if you see it from a celebrity.
Yes, and there's also there's apps that will search for. You can I now can't remember what it's called, but I'm sure there's an app where if you see a picture of a celebrity wearing something, you go, I like that, and then you can basically put that in the app, and the app will say, oh well, you can buy something similar from here, so you can instantaneously do it. But also, I guess the other thing is when celebrities always had that, they would do the red carpet and they'd be loaned a fantastic designer dress, and everyone would go, he's wearing this dress by so and so, hoping that I was going to say us, but it certainly wouldn't be me. But people with more money would go and buy the same thing. But now, of course, you've got the influencers who, again, like we only know maybe through social media, but they get given or loaned stuff because their millions of followers will see a picture of them wearing it, go, look, I'm wearing this, or I know, riding this bicycle or whatever it is. And so we go, oh, well, that's, that person is doing that and I like that. And in a way, that picks up on that two-way nature of social media, because even though the influencers are not like us in the sense that they have millions of followers and their lives are geared around monetizing their profile and so on, but the appeal of them supposedly is that they are like us, that they're not celebrities. It's like, it's just like your more fashionable and cool best friend. And so they're relatable. And that authenticity, even though on one level we know they're not authentic because they've been given this stuff, so they're obviously advertising it, but they feel more authentic than seeing an advert where it's an actor or a model that's been hired. And it's that weird thing of we want the authenticity, even though we know that it's actually still just a kind of advertising.
So, in short, because I know we've got another 5 minutes, just summing up, not all what you said, but some of what you said, has technology made us, could you be argued, less unique than we have been? Yes, there have been some things that technology are doing now that we've always have done. The technology just ramped up the process. But is there an argument to say that technology has made us, in a way, less unique, more atomized? Like, for example, like you hear a lot about relationships, and even in terms of romantic relationships and even friendships, where people tend to have the same political affiliations within those groups or with their partners, whereas before that never used to be, regardless. You could have a conservative and Labour person together. That doesn't seem to be a case now. So going on a wider point, do you think it's made us more, not just less unique, but more atomized?
Definitely more atomized. Although again, that's not only the technology. The technology has facilitated it, but we were already more individuated just because of social forces, because the way work has changed, because of the way because we've got more freedom in some senses. Like we can move around more, we can choose our job more, we don't have to live the same kind of lives that our parents lived. So we have a lot more choices, which is great, but that also means that we're often uprooted from the family or the place we grew up, or like the school. Maybe we're not in touch with all our school friends because we've all gone off in different directions and done different things. So definitely more atomized, not necessarily because of the technology. The homogeneity thing I think is really interesting, that kind of sorting yourself and trying to not socialize with people who disagree with you. I think that's also definitely a trend. But again, I think that's not necessarily down to technology. I think that's I don't know, what is it? It's a reluctance to have our ideas challenged.
Yeah.
But that does in a sense come back to the identity point, I think, because if part of your identity is your political opinions, say, then if someone disagrees with your political opinions, they're not just saying, okay, I hear your ideas, here are my ideas, let's discuss, maybe we'll both change our mind. It feels like they're attacking who you are when they disagree with you. And that is partly, I think, why it's all become much more fraught and fractious and much harder to have civil conversations across political divides, because people feel it as a personal attack on their identity and on the identity group that they have chosen to be part of. So it's like, you're coming for me and you're coming for all my friends. And so I'm going to fight you, rather than we sit down together and we have a conversation. And I go, oh, okay, that's interesting. I don't really think that, but you do kind of have a point. And we still do that in
Yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah.
That's the thing. But it is harder, I think, both in social media and on real life.
Just finally then, how do you hope technology and data develop over the next 5 years? Because obviously by the time this comes out, it'll be just before the election, hopefully. So what are your hopes? Let's be optimistic in terms of how you hope technology and data develops over the next 5 years.
Okay, yeah, let's be optimistic. I hope that we use technology more to connect with each other and to share ideas and exchange ideas, because there's nothing in the technology that really stops that. But we do have to decide we want to. More broadly, I think data and technology and AI have masses of potential, just to do things that humans find quite hard to do because our minds can only cope with so much information at once, and to do things faster and more efficiently. It's not necessarily the things people are excited about. I mean, all the generative, the things that make pictures and chat GPT and so on. I think that's less useful than a lot of quiet information crunching that's been going on for ages, doing things like medical scans or making railway systems run more efficiently, which Lord knows we could certainly do with.
Mm.
So I'm quite hopeful about that. But in terms of how we use it with each other, I I'd like us all to be a little less obsessed with how other people see us and a bit more open to listening to other people and thinking that maybe sometimes we might be wrong and it's okay to change our minds.
Well, if people want to find your book, where can I go to? And are you planning to do any other works with regards to technology and data?
Well, I probably should start thinking about the next book at some point soon. But meanwhile, this one is called Technology is Not the Problem. It's available at all good bookshops and some evil ones. It's published by HarperCollins. So, failing everything else, you can find them on the internet and order directly from them.
Well, I'll leave a link to a particular website where you can buy the book. All right. Uh,
Brilliant.
Timandra Harkness, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on to the 286 project.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
Thank you.